I'm Tabish Khan. So thank you for joining this talk about the artist who ate a corgi and other stories. So we'll get to it about who ate the corgi. But essentially, it's an art-filled journey through London's history. So we're going to be looking at certain stories that relate to art history in London, the art that's been made about London, and also because the reason I do what I do is I want people to go out there and see art. I'll also be including some recommendations for things to see relating to the stories that you're seeing. If that sounds complicated, don't worry, it will make sense when we get there. So before I introduce myself fully, just to be clear, this is part of the A River Runs Through It exhibition, which is a fantastic exhibition of artists who create works about London, of London, inspired by London. And you should visit the exhibition if you haven't done so already on ariverrunsthroughit.london, and you can find out all the details about the events they've had also on their Instagram page, which is at A River Runs Through It 2020. So please do visit that. It's meant to end tonight, but I'm hoping they'll be able to extend it for a few days. And thank you everyone who's paid £5 for this talk, because the profits of that go towards London Air Ambulance, who are the charity partner of this exhibition. If you listen to a recording of the private view that's on the River Runs Through It website, you can hear them talk about the fantastic work that they do. So it's definitely a worthy cause. And also as part of the exhibition, there will be a raffle. And the raffle is £3 to enter. And there are some amazing prizes, including dinners out on the South Bank and also artworks by the artists. So it's definitely worth doing, and there's no limit to how many times you enter. So that's the kind of admin about the exhibition. Please do check it out after the talk. In terms of me, my name is Tabish Khan. Obviously, as I've said, I am the visual arts editor for Londonist. It's on the t-shirt. I also write a top 5 for FAD Magazine every week, and I'm also a trustee of ArtCan, who are a not-for-profit that supports artists and it's a collaboration of artists. So just to be clear, I am not an art historian, nor am I someone who knows all of London's history. I'm not planning to do all of London's history because that'd be far too much to cover in one presentation. So what I've done is I've picked some interesting stories throughout London's history, running over the last 350 years. And I'm going to follow them in a rough chronological order. And hopefully you'll find some of the stories very interesting, and it'll give you ideas for what to go out and see later. And at the bottom of the page, you can see my Twitter and Instagram, which is at London Art Critic. So if you want to share anything with me or connect with me afterwards, that's how you do it. So moving on to the first slide, which is a fiery start. So I went on a website called Art UK. I highly recommend it to people because it has catalogued every single painting in a collection in the UK. So any painting that is in any collection in the UK, whether it's on display or not, oil painting, you can find it. They're also working on doing the same for sculptures. So when I searched on there, London and what's the earliest depiction of London, this is what I found. And unsurprisingly, because it's a major event in London's history, Great Fire of London in 1666. But the reason I wanted to share it was that it was painted in that year. So you can imagine there were artists living in London at the time who saw this happen on the banks of the Thames and got out their sketch pad, made a sketch, and then translated that into an oil painting of the event that was happening at the time. So it goes to show you that art in London has been inspired by London and its events for over 350 years. I promise that all the other stories in this aren't so horrendous, showing devastation in London. It's a lot lighter, but that's a good start to talk about the earliest paintings of London. And now we're going to step forward through time. So next, if I asked anyone to think of a scene of London painted by an old master, I think a lot of people would think of Canaletto, who painted a lot of paintings of London It's worth noting before we talk about the man himself that what you can see, obviously all those boats won't be there, but even today, that's the view that you can see of Greenwich across the river, because those buildings at the time were Greenwich Hospital, then became the Naval College. Now it's known as the Old Royal Naval College. And the reason I mention it is that it's worth visiting today because recently they refurbished the Painted Hall, which for those who don't know it, it's often been compared to the Sistine Chapel of London. So it's this beautiful painted ceiling, and it's been fully restored. I went there while they were restoring it. I'm glad I don't work in restoration because it looked like a very painstaking job of slowly peeling away the dirt using cotton buds. It didn't look like a fun job, but they did it over the course of a couple of years. And now it's open again. So definitely one to visit when you're in Greenwich. And as for the man himself, Canaletto, I always thought this when I started discovering his work. How comes I see so much of his work in the UK? Like even more so than I see in Italy, even though he's Italian. And the reason is that he specialized in painting Venetian paintings of the canals of Venice. I mean, his name literally translates as Canaletto, basically means little canal. So he painted Venice, and around the time he was painting, there was this rather opulent coming of age ceremony for young men in Britain. And when they came to like the age of 20, 21, they would go on a grand tour of Europe, which involved traveling around Europe, seeing it all, grabbing souvenirs. You know, much like today, we take snaps and postcards of places like Venice. They would go to Venice, and Canaletto kind of cornered that market, was one of the artists who cornered that market of saying, oh, you want a painting to take back with you to the UK? I make them. Here, you can buy one. And he often made them quite small. And the reason Canaletto made them small was that so people could transport them back. You know, they were the right size to be transported back. The reason he then came to the UK to paint the Thames was that this great racket that he had of selling paintings to wealthy English noblemen who came over dried up when the War of the Austrian Succession happened. And therefore that prevented all these people coming over. So he thought, well, if my market's not coming to me, then I'm going to my market because I've got a reputation in England. So he came over to London and started painting what he knew, scenes of waterways, obviously not the canals of Venice anymore, but a River Thames, and he had an established client base. So he spent 9 years here painting and selling works. So that's why you can see a lot of his works in UK collections. So the next work is not about keeping things small, it's about going big. This, nobody knows for sure, but we think, or the curators think, this is the UK's largest oil painting. So it's over 3 meters high and over 7.5 meters wide, which is around 6 people laid head to toe. So it's a massive painting, and it hangs in the Guildhall Art Gallery, which I recommend visiting. And it's so big that they built the gallery around it. That's why you can see the balcony on the left and right of the image, is because they couldn't fit it on either floor. So it had to go across both floors. And the reason and what it depicts is it's painted by John Singleton Copley, and it's the defeat of the floating batteries. So this is Britain defeating Spain and France in Gibraltar as part of the American War of Independence. Interestingly enough, Copley was American. So this is rather unpatriotic of him because he's painting his rivals or his country's rivals being defeated in battle. But I suppose a paycheck's a paycheck. And when the City of London says, we'll pay you money to make it, you go for it. The problem that he had was it took him 2 years to paint it. And then when he showed it to the City of London Corporation, they said, we don't like it. It had too much focus on the naval element and not on the military element on the ground, which you see on the right. So they said to him, we need you to repaint it. But obviously all the people he used to model for it were scattered all over the place. He had to go hunt them all down. It took him another 7 years to repaint it and left him so out of pocket that the commission wouldn't cover it. So, being the enterprising businessman he is, he decided that he will set up a tent in Green Park and charge people a shilling to see the painting before he then sold it, well, before delivered it to the City of London Corporation. And now it hangs in the Guildhall Art Gallery. And I also recommend visiting the Guildhall Art Gallery for another reason, not just because of the art, because if you go into the basement, you'll find the remains of a Roman amphitheatre, one of the few Roman ruins that you can find in London in situ. They've also got a very interesting depiction of Roman gladiatorial sports on the wall, which is very Tron-like in sort of green wireframe, which feels very different to the Roman ruins, and it's always quite something to see it, and you'll never forget it. So that's the biggest painting. And next we're going to move on to one of art's famous feuds, which is Turner versus Constable. And if any of you have seen the film Mr. Turner, where Timothy Spall played Turner, you may remember this scene, which is both of them were showing at the Royal Academy in the summer exhibition, a tradition that still exists 250 years later, delayed this year, of course, due to COVID. And they have what's called Varnishing Day, which they still have, but made more sense back when everyone was an oil painter, which is when you would apply the varnish to seal your painting. And you could make little tweaks. That's what you're allowed to do. And Turner and Constable were rivals, and Constable unveiled his and Turner unveiled his. And the general consensus was Constable's was better, was a superior painting. And Turner, seeing this reaction, decided to take a blob of red paint and add it to the painting, which is the blob you can see, as a boy. And that transformed his painting and then won over everyone who thought that Turner had now produced the superior painting, whereas Constable said, he has been in here and he has fired a gun. So if they didn't like each other before, Constable really disliked Turner after this event. And the summer exhibition, many of you will have been to it. It's held every year at Royal Academy since 1769. And showing your work there can be a big boost for younger artists as well as established artists. And the reason they hold it every year is the money that's generated goes towards helping run the Royal Academy and also for running the Royal Academy schools, which is one of the few art schools that I know of anyway, that doesn't charge tuition fees. The course itself is free, but it's very limited. I think they only take on about 18 candidates a year. So it's a very small art school, but it's free. So that's why it's highly sought after. And obviously it's got a very good reputation. So that's Turner and Constable. And the next thing I'm going to move on to is a bit of prudishness in British history. So one of my favorite rooms in the V&A is the cast courts. And the reason I love it is that it's got replicas of famous works from history and from art history. So if you look in the top left corner, that's Raphael's School of Athens, which can be found in the Vatican, which shows all of the famous philosophers from Greece. So it's a replica of that painting. And in the background, the gold doors, for anyone who's been to Florence will recognize those as the doors to the baptistry in Florence, the Florence Cathedral's baptistry, referred to Michelangelo as the Gates of Paradise. And that's why they nicknamed the Gates of Paradise. And obviously, speaking of Michelangelo himself, I think many of you will have recognized in the center is Michelangelo's David. So that is a perfect replica made from the original, cast from the original. And it was given as a gift from the city of Florence to Queen Victoria. But when Queen Victoria saw it, she didn't like the fact that his genitals were on display. She thought it was too sensationalist, and I don't want to have to look at his manhood. So she said, can we create a fig leaf to cover it up? So fig leaf was made in the style of the statue and used to cover up his genitals. That was later removed once Britain became less prudish. But the fig leaf itself can still be seen. It's attached to the back of the pedestal that you can see in this picture. So if you go to the V&A's cast courts, if you go to the back, you will see the fig leaf that was there. And it is now goes to show that, you know, it's something you wouldn't find next to the original Michelangelo David. So it's something we've got that they don't. So that's an interesting, fun story about how prudish we were back in the Victorian days. And the next one is a painting by Georgiana Houghton. Now, she was a little bit ahead of her time, because if you look at the year 1871, abstract art wasn't really present anywhere in the Western sphere in 1871. That would come much later, or at least 3 or 4 decades later, after the Impressionists. So she was a bit of ahead of her time. But what was more interesting about Georgiana Houghton was that she was a spiritualist. So she communicated with the dead, or claimed that she communed with the dead. So when she created paintings, she didn't say they were her creation. She was also communing with Renaissance painters like Titian and Correggio, who were guiding her hand. And she also said she was guided by archangels and angels who guided her paintings. In fact, they also told her how much she should set her prices at, which may have been the reason why she didn't sell so well. Because when they were displayed at the New British Gallery on Old Bond Street, which doesn't exist anymore, but is obviously home to many galleries still today, she didn't sell very well, but she's very much back in fashion now. She had a show at the Courtauld Institute of Art in 2016, which was very well received. And a fellow spiritualist painter, Swedish painter, Hilma af Klint, recently had a show at the Guggenheim, where it was the Guggenheim in New York, its most visited show ever, with 600,000 visitors. So it goes to show you that spiritualism may not have sold well back then, but is very much back in fashion today. Sticking with the same year, obviously you can't think of London unless you think of Monet. I didn't want to talk much about Monet because Impressionism has been covered to death, but it's worth noting that Impressionism was seen as an insult at the time, because it was they said they only captured the impression and not the real picture itself. But London would have been great for someone like Monet because of how polluted and hazy it was at the time. I know people think of London as polluted today, but actually today it's a lot cleaner than it used to be. The Thames was very much a working river, so it had much more pollution in it, and most people had coal fires. So the housing was contributing to the pollution as well. It had been very hazy and very foggy, which ironically is perfect for someone like Monet, because that's what he's trying to capture, that sort of haziness and fogginess of London. And you know what? It's still one of the most popular genres in the world today. I mean, I don't think that a year goes by without an Impressionism exhibition in London. And there's one on at the Royal Academy right now, and there's one next year at the National Gallery. So yes, it's a popular genre, and it's good to see that London contributed to it as well. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, we're going to go into a bit more destruction now. So this is what's known as the Rokeby Venus by Velázquez. It hangs in the National Gallery. Now, you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at it now, but it looks pretty well maintained. But on the right, you'll see a picture, a black and white picture of when it was attacked by a suffragette with a meat cleaver who slashed at it at least 5 times. So done a great job repairing it, actually. And if you look at the Mona Lisa, who was shot, they've repaired that too, but you can see where the bullet mark was. While this, it's really hard to see where the slashes are when you see it in person. And the reason it was attacked was it was attacked by Mary Richardson, and simultaneously Mary Wood, another suffragette, attacked a Sargent painting at the Royal Academy of Arts. And to quote from them, I'll read the quote from my notes, which is, "I've tried to destroy a valuable picture because I wish to show the public that they have no security for their property nor for their art treasures until women are given political freedom." So a very powerful and important cause, though I imagine people sit on the fence as to whether destroying art is the right way to achieve that cause or not. But it's an important part of our art history. And also, I think Mary Richardson, who was the one who attacked this painting, she also didn't like this painting because she said men just stood around gawping at it all day. So it goes to show you that nudity back in those days was still titillating back then, even if today we just assume it's a normal part the works we see in the National Gallery. So I'm going to jump forward a bit more to the first photography artwork in this presentation, which is a very famous picture of St. Paul's Cathedral, often referred to as St. Paul Survives by Herbert Mason. And the reason it's so iconic was this picture was taken during the Blitz, where the bombs managed to destroy everything around St. Paul's, but not St. Paul's itself. So it's seen as this kind of English resoluteness, you know, English fighting spirit in the Blitz. We were living through it, and yet the St. Paul's stands strong, just as the UK does. Interestingly enough, it's the 5th St. Paul's. So St. Paul's hasn't been so lucky in the past. It has been razed to the ground, destroyed over many times over, but a cathedral has sat on that site from at least 600 AD. So, but the reason I also want to talk about St. Paul's is you might think that everywhere you go in London, you can always see St. Paul's, and it's actually not that tall, not compared to all the skyscrapers around it. And the reason is there are 13 protected sight lines for St. Paul's, so that you can ensure that you see it from various angles at all times. So when you see quirkily designed buildings, one is the skyscraper known as the Cheese Grater, which seems lopsided to one side. It's because it's allowing a view through. And in fact, there's a shopping centre, One New Change, which is almost cleaved in half, so you can see through the middle of it. I always think the most interesting sightline is one of the longest. It's from a place called King Henry's Mound in Richmond Park. So in Richmond Park, there is a mound where you can see all the way straight through to St. Paul's unobstructed. The rumours, which has now been largely dispelled as an urban myth, is that King Henry VIII, when he was having his second wife beheaded, Anne Boleyn, so he could marry his third, stood in Richmond Park, which was part of his hunting grounds, waiting for a signal from the top of the Tower of London, which is near St. Paul's, obviously in the city, to let him know that the deed was done and that he could now remarry. I think it's largely been proven as a myth, but it's still the point in Richmond Park is still referred to as King Henry's Mound for that reason. So the legend survives, and so does the sightline. Right, I'm going to take a little sip of water while we... So now, moving on, we're going to move on a few decades to the 70s for the kind of start of our story around conceptual art. So if you look at it, yes, it is just a pile of bricks by minimalist artist Carl Andre. And his work is very minimalist, so it's about using everyday objects to create art. But the reason this piece of work is very important was the Tate Gallery, which is now Tate Britain, but then got split in Tate Britain Modern, which we'll come on to, bought this artwork for £2,297 in 1976, which was seen as an outrageous sum of money. And it led to much tabloid controversy where people were outraged that the taxpayers or the money was being used to buy what's essentially just a pile of bricks. And the art critic Jonathan Jones of The Guardian recently wrote about it, and he referred to it as the most boring piece of controversial art ever. And I have to say that I kind of agree. I think it's not that interesting at all. And I've always had a dislike for Carl Andre when I found out that his partner, Anna Mendieta, who was also was a fantastic artist, they were a couple, and she died at quite a young age because she fell out of a window from a large height. And Carl Andre, who was with her at the time, and they'd both been drinking, said he had no recollection of what happened. Though her friends who were close to her think he's probably the one who pushed her out the window, and he was known for being very violent and tempestuous. So yeah, the man himself is a bit more controversial than the work, I think. But that's sort of the first controversy about money and how much is paid for art. And if you think about it, £2,300 is not much these days, but back then was seen as a controversial amount. So I'm going to talk about a tank. So for those who don't know it, you can find a Soviet-era T-34 tank parked in Bermondsey, on the corner of Page's Walk and Mandela Way, if I believe it correctly. But if you're looking for it, just go on Google and type in T34 Bermondsey, and you'll find it. And it's known to locals affectionately as Stompy. But the reason it's there was it's on a corner plot of land that was bought by a local developer who wanted to build housing on it or build a business on it. And he applied to Southwark Council and said, I want to build something on it. And Southwark Council refused him planning permission. And he was outraged that, you know, why would you refuse me planning permission? So then he reapplied and said, may I put a tank on this plot of ground instead? And at the time, Southwark Council thought, oh, he means like a water tank or a septic tank. And they said, sure, you can put a tank on it. And then he bought this, which was a prop for 95, and put the tank on that plot of ground and pointed the barrel at the offices of Southwark Council as an up yours to Southwark Council. I mean, the barrel has been since moved, so it no longer points at Southwark Council. But the good thing about the tank is that local artists redecorate it quite a lot. So this is a kind of Mondrian look, but it's had a pink makeover. It's been turned back into military colors. And I think right now it's been painted with a sort of NHS blue to kind of recognize the key workers who've been working hard during the recent pandemic. But definitely one to snap when you're out and about. And occasionally they do have open days where you can get inside the tank or get up close, but normally it's behind fencing. So that's a fun story about tanks. And moving on to a bit of controversy again. So this is from the Sensation exhibition at Royal Academy. So if you want to know about when British art took off again in recent contemporary history, this is when it happened. This is a show at the normally genteel Royal Academy, but it was hosted by Charles Saatchi's collection of what was then go on to be known as the Young British Artists. And it was a highly controversial show where 4 Royal Academicians resigned because of it. And the windows of the Royal Academy were smashed, and guards had to be posted next to this work, which was by Marcus Harvey, who's largely forgotten now as one of the young British artists compared to people like Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin. But he made this portrait of Myra Hindley, who, for those who don't know, she was a serial killer. Her and her partner murdered a lot of young children. They were known as the Moors murderers. And you'll have to get up close to see this, but he's recreated her portrait out of children's handprints. And that was the very controversial element of it. 2 artists attacked it while it was on display. And then for the rest of the run of the exhibition, not armed guards, but guards had to be posted next to it to protect the artwork. Which is actually quite strange to me, because if you think about the Royal Academy now, it's a very genteel establishment, you know, where all its members tend to be older folk. To think of something quite controversial being displayed there is a surprise. Back in '97, I think I would have been too young. Well, no, I was 15 at the time, but I wasn't very much into art, so I wouldn't have been to see this show. And then sticking to just as the turn of the millennium, we'll talk about the 4th plinth. So the 4th plinth is actually an empty plinth in Trafalgar Square, which now always has an artwork on it. But the reason there was always a 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square was that people had paid money to put a statue of William IV on it. So another statue of a man on top of a horse, you know, because we don't have enough of those around that area. But that's what they were doing. And they ran out of money. So the plinth was built, but nothing was placed on it. And it laid empty for years until someone came up with the idea of, why don't we put contemporary art on it as a temporary concept? And then it caught on, and it's been now inhabited by artists for a long time. And the last plinth previous to the current one was this one by Michael Rakowitz. And it's my favorite one, actually, so that's why I picked a picture of it. It's an Assyrian guardian. So like the ones you find at the British Museum, Lamassu, winged guardians that are meant to protect things like tombs. But it's made from date syrup cans because the artist who made it is Iraqi American, and that was one of the exports of Iraq before the Gulf Wars disrupted everything. And also, the Winged Guardians were the type that were destroyed by ISIS when they destroyed a lot of statues around the world. And I really liked it for that reason, because it stood for this kind of, you know, history may be destroyed in other parts of the world, but here in London, we care about preserving multicultural history, the world's history. And currently, there's a work by Heather Phillipson on it, which is a really surreal big dollop of cream with a cherry and a giant fly on it. But it also has a drone on it, which is the interesting element, because the drone is watching you. So if you go to the statue and log onto the drone's website, you can see a slightly delayed live feed. So you can watch the drone watching you, which feels very, very surveillance state and very much a representation of the world today. That, you know, you think of drones and the fact that we're all on camera all the time. So that's the full plinth. And this work may be familiar to many of you. It's Tracey Emin's Unmade Bed, which if you ever ask someone to have a debate about art and they come up with, yeah, but it's not really art, is it? This is often the work that's cited, because it's Tracey Emin's Unmade Bed, which shows the state of her bed when she was going through a very dark time in her life. So there's like used condoms and empty alcohol bottles and tissues all around it. It's strange because people remember this from the Turner Prize in 1999 when she was nominated. But I think a lot of people actually forget she didn't win. And the person who did win was Steve McQueen, who's now gone on to become a big Hollywood director, directed 12 Years a Slave, and has exhibitions currently on at both Tates. And he's also the only artist to have won a Turner Prize and an Oscar. I mean, it's worth noting another Turner Prize winner has turned to film, Sam Taylor Wood, now Sam Taylor Johnson. Thankfully, she did not win an Oscar for 50 Shades of Grey, which is the last movie she made. So she hasn't yet managed an Oscar and a Turner Prize, but maybe, given time. And then the work itself later sold for £2.5 million. So therefore, it's still holding its value, and it was given back to Tate actually to manage. So they have it in their collection, though it's not currently on display. Yes, and speaking of Tate Modern. So Tate Modern opened in 2000, and it really kind of fired the gun for kind of contemporary art being a big part of London scene. I mean, even today, for example, I appreciate visitor figures this year are going to be a bit off, but last year it was Britain's second most visited cultural institution after the British Museum. So contemporary art definitely attracts lots of people, and some of the big ones have been the things that happen in the Turbine Hall. So for those who don't know, the Tate Modern used to be a power station, and they've got a big space which used to be the Turbine Hall. And in the Turbine Hall, they've displayed lots of artworks, including a giant sun by Olaf Eliasson, which we were all supposed to like lie in front of and enjoy. So I think a lot of people think of it as their favorite. There's been floating fish, a giant shipping container that you can walk into. It's so dark that you can't see where you're going. And currently, Cara Walker's fountain is there, which is a fantastic monument to, well, what she's done is she's contrasted the monuments to colonialism you see normally. So the one outside Buckingham Palace is a tribute to Queen Victoria and the colonial era of Britain. So her one is showing sort of the Black history, showing a woman who's had her throat slit and water's pouring out of it. So it is a really powerful piece of art, and that's also been extended because it was meant to be removed during lockdown. So you can definitely go out and see it now at Tate Modern. So I'm just checking how I'm doing for time. I think I'm doing okay. Right, I'm going to crack on. There's a bit more left, and we have to get to eating a corgi because I promised that. So we are coming to it. So the next one is a work by Michael Landy called Breakdown, which happened in an old CNA, if you remember that, Jane, which is now a Gap on Oxford Street. So it's opposite Bond Street. The Gap opposite Bond Street station is the storefront this happened in, where the artist Michael Landy decided that he was going to show, well, an interesting double take on consumer culture. He would destroy everything he owned, including his passport, childhood photographs, basically leave himself completely empty in life, in a way of kind of saying, I'm giving up on consumer culture, but then ironically, I will then be turned into the ultimate consumer, because then I'll have to buy everything to replace everything I've destroyed. So people could walk past and watch his entire life being destroyed on a conveyor belt. And it was organized by an organization known as Art Angel. And if you're interested, Art Angel are known for doing really ambitious art installations. So they're the ones who flooded a flat with copper sulfate, which then turned into crystals and covered all the walls of the flat. They've had a underground, they've had spoken word works within Van Gogh's old house. They've done different mourning rituals within a big underground concrete structure. They always find amazing venues. And currently they've got work by Elizabeth Price in an old church that's currently ongoing in kind of near Elephant and Castle / Borough way. That's just opened. Michael Landy himself is an interesting artist. He once created a skip for artists to dump their rejected works into, like a big container that any artist could come up and throw any work they weren't happy with into this giant tip. And he also was the National Gallery's artist in residence, where he created these kinetic sculptures which looked at the fact that National Gallery has lots of violence depicted in the martyrdom or the saints, but you don't get that feeling of violence because it's all on paintings. So he created kinetic sculptures where, for example, where St. Jerome beats his chest with a rock, you press the pedal and a giant statue, St. Jerome, would slam a rock against itself, causing flakes of paint to come off. And Saint Apollonia, who famously removed all her teeth with pliers, you would press a lever and she would slam some pliers against her teeth. So it was a very shocking and violent show that I really enjoyed, actually, because it's that thing that violence is in the National Gallery, but you also think of it as a quiet, reverential space. He was bringing noise and violence back into it. So now is the moment you've all been waiting for, eating a Corgi. Why did a man eat a Corgi? And it's an artist whose name is Mark McGowan, and he's an animal lover. And he was criticizing Prince Philip and his friends who at the time had shot a fox. So he said, well, why is it okay to shoot a fox? What I will do is I will eat the Queen's beloved Corgis. So what he did was, he didn't kill a Corgi, just to be clear. He spoke to a local breeding farm where a Corgi had died of natural causes, and then had the Corgi made into meatballs, which he ate live on radio. Weirdly enough, on a radio show that Yoko Ono, better known for being John Lennon's wife, was also on a radio show, and she ate some too. But he has previous, he's done that. He's done a similar process where he ate a swan, and he's nailed his leg in a gallery as well. He's a very eccentric character. So yeah, he's known for these sorts of acts. I haven't seen anything from him lately, so maybe he's due another slightly sensational artwork. And now moving on to kind of, so I've only been writing about art since about 2012. So now we're going to move on to some of the things that kind of I remember and I've had experience. So 2013 was the opening of the Migration Museum. So the Migration Museum was a recognition that, migrants now is a dirty word almost. Like, newspapers talk about boatloads of migrants coming in. And it was to recognize that London is a city of migrants, from the Huguenots who came over from France and the kinder transport of Jewish people who came to London. It's always been a thriving hub of immigrants. Obviously the Romans as well, if we go further back. So they opened this museum to sort of challenge that view. And it was in Lambeth, in what's now the sort of fire station headquarters, London Fire Brigade headquarters, near Vauxhall Station. And then it has handily migrated, and now it's inside Lewisham Shopping Centre. And these are works that have been given to it. These are sections of the Berlin Wall that have been painted by Thierry Noir and Stick. But if you look between the two stone sculptures, you will see the symbol for the Migration Museum, and that's where the entrance is. So that's how you know how to find it. It's one of my favorites museums in London, one of the new museums. I even have one of their I Am an Immigrant t-shirt. I'm not wearing it today, I'm wearing my Londonist one instead. But yeah, it's a great museum and one I highly recommend visiting, always free to enter as well. Now, the next one I want to move on to is what some of you may know as the most expensive painting ever sold, the Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci for $450 million at Christie's, New York. Nobody actually knows what's happened with it. This was meant to hang at the Abu Dhabi in Le Louvre in Abu Dhabi, and it's not been seen since. So there's worries about whether it really is a real Leonardo, whether it's been damaged. But the reason I wanted to talk about it was it's an example of happenstance in London. So I was actually working in an office around the corner from Christie's in London, and I didn't even know that it was going to be shown in Christie's London before it was auctioned in Christie's New York. So I was just walking out on my lunch break and I saw this queue going into Christie's. So I asked the people, why are you queuing? And they said, oh, but because of this. And then I thought, well, it's like a half-hour queue. Should I join the queue? And then I had a meeting, so I quickly rescheduled all my meetings and I joined the queue. And it just shows you that the stuff you can just stumble across in London is great, that you can just come across this sort of stuff. And sticking with recent history, in 2018, this statue was unveiled at Parliament Square. Actually, that is a picture I took of the unveiling. So you can see Theresa May on the left, who was unveiling it. Sadiq Khan is hidden behind the sculpture. And on the right is Caroline Criado Perez, who led the campaign to get a sculpture up. Because she walked around Parliament Square and found that there were no sculptures to women. They were all of men. And some of them were famous men, but others were men you never heard of. So she thought we should have a sculpture of a woman. So she started this campaign, and it was decided that the suffragette Millicent Fawcett, with the great quote, "Courage calls courage everywhere," would be unveiled. And it was made by one of the young British artists, Gillian Waring, who created this sculpture. So now you can find it in Parliament Square alongside the likes of Churchill. So, and obviously that sort of sculptural representation is very much a hot topic today, with obviously the tearing down of sculpture in Bristol and questions about whether other sculptures should be torn down. So very relevant even to today. And then we get to everyone's favorite prankster, Banksy. And in 2018, he sold a work at, well, one of his works was sold at auction, and then as soon as it's sold, it shredded itself. Only shredded half of it, though he says that was a malfunction. It should have shredded all of it. But ironically, it's now worth more than when it sold for. And when this was put on display, I didn't actually see it, but I remember seeing pictures of the queue outside Sotheby's to get in to see it. Just one work of art. And they were along the length of Bond Street, even in the rain. It was raining that weekend, I remember that. That's what put me off, I think, going to stand in the rain to queue for it. And so we're really nearly near the end. And once we finish, I think we can unmute everyone. We can have time for questions. And apologies if someone come through because I can't see the comments. So this is not a sculpture from 2020. It's actually earlier. But the reason I want to point it out is that it's an Anthony Gormley, and he is one of the artists you can find everywhere. Like if you just look up, I mean, in Mayfair, there's one that stands on top of Burlington Arcade, which people miss because everyone's got their head down and charging in London. But this one is actually two sculptures. It's not a reflection. One's on the inside, one's the outside. But it's at a building called 350 Euston Road. And interestingly enough, a building I actually worked in before I became an art critic. So I would walk past this sculpture every day, not knowing there was a Gormley or not knowing anything about it other than it's an interesting sculpture. And the reason I wanted to point that out is that art's pretty much everywhere in London. It's all scattered over the place, and sometimes you just need to look up and see it. If you are looking for things to see in history and art, I would also recommend my friend Katie, who Look Up London on Instagram. She's the person who advocates for this the most. Always look up, because there's so much history to see in London, and art is another part of it. So before I conclude, I suppose the question is, what's the next stage in art history? You know, what comes next? And the thing is, you don't know. There's so much happening in London. Anything could happen. Maybe it's one of the artists in this exhibition, which is all on display there. So that's what I want to talk about, is that London is full of art. It's got lots of history, but it's also so much to see today that is either referencing that history or is a part of something that's still evolving. So thank you everyone for listening. I will conclude by just reminding everyone that if you haven't had a chance, please do check out A River Runs Through It, which is ariverrunsthroughit.london, where you've got a virtual walkthrough of the exhibition, a sound recording of the private view, and there's also a chance to enter a raffle where money goes towards London Air Ambulance with great prizes. All your money for this talk has also gone towards London Air Ambulance, aside from Eventbrite's fee. And yeah, thank you all for listening. I've enjoyed talking about all these things, and I suppose what we can do now is we can open up to see if anyone's got any questions.
It was amazing to be.
Thank you.
That was like so insightful. Like, I'm going to see London very differently now when I walk around. It's amazing because Mark McGowan was my visiting professor when I was at Chelsea. So I did not know that this Corgi the artwork was related to him. But like, I think this was in 2010 when I graduated. So after that, he went on his little, I think, his Facebook sort of. So that was, and I really found it very interesting about Carl Andre as well, what you said. I had no idea about his personal life, although I always sort of worship, like, you know, it was quite like groundbreaking work for me in my eyes. But great. Thank you, Tabish.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Was there any questions for anyone else? Michael, I think you're speaking, but you're mute.
Oh, there we go. Someone's asked about what's your favourite piece of all the pieces that you've talked about today?
See, people always ask me this, like, what's your favourite artwork? And I feel like that's like picking a favourite child.
Who's your favourite child?
I don't have any children, you know, but I have 3 nephews, and I'm not allowed to pick between the 3 of them either. So, but I was trying to think of all the works that we've seen. What was my favourite? On the screen, I don't think I would have a favourite, or maybe I should just pick one. I feel like now I have to go back through the slides and think about what I talked about.
Well, I think, well, apart from the Banksy, I think one of my favourites is the Greenwich piece, because I just think the idea that the picture, the view today is identical is incredible.
Yeah. No, this one, yes. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I think I would actually say that if I was to pick one, it would this one. I love this one. This is my favourite Paul Plinth. I'm going to pick that one. Right. Excellent.
We're hoping to have the last Leonardo in our prize draw, but obviously since it's disappeared.
Yeah, it might not be a real Leonardo, so people might feel conned.
I don't know if anybody who's been to the Painted Hall, which you talked about earlier, which is, I think, one of the most amazing places in London. But in the basement of that, they've got a Victorian bowling alley.
Right.
And sometimes they open it up, or they used to anyway. And so you to have a go every now and again. And the bowling balls are made out of the wood, which were the old warships from back in the day.
Wow.
And that is absolutely fantastic. So that's always worth it.
I might stop sharing my screen so I can see you all as well. Yeah. Right, excellent. Thank you. Any other questions?
Let's see. Most collectible artist, somebody's asked about.
Surely all the artists in this exhibition, right? They're the ones you want to collect, right? The thing about collecting artists, I would say, because people do ask me this question a lot, you know, what should I buy? And things like that. I think, do you know the thing is, the thing I always say with art is, it sounds like it's cliche, but I always say buy the stuff that you like, because if it appreciates in value and you can sell it for more, amazing, quids in. If it doesn't, then you still got an artwork that you like. So you haven't lost out. I mean, I think of like one of my earliest paintings was a painting by a young kind of street artist called Hannah Adamajek. And I bought it for about £600, and it's now worth about 1,200. It's probably worth double. But even if it's sort of quintupled in value, unless I was hard up on money, I don't think I'd sell it because I bought it because I like it.
I've got a Lucy Sparrow piece which I bought about 6 years ago, and that's doubled in value. But I wouldn't sell it ever because I bought it and I love it and I stare at it every day. And the gallery keeps emailing me saying, we've got to buy it. Should you ever wish to sell it? But obviously, everyone has a price. But I love it so much. It's called Very British Things, and it's a cabinet full of food, British food like Heinz baked beans and Jacob's cream crackers, but it's all made out of felt.
Yes. So I didn't actually mention her in my talk, but Lucy Sparrow is an interesting artist who makes work out of felt. So she once made a whole corner shop out of felt. So it's like she took over an old corner shop convenience store and stocked it with shelves of like newspapers, chocolate bars, everything made out of felt. And then she also, in Soho, she did a sex shop where everything was made out of felt as well. And even though everything's made out of felt, there were still people walking in thinking it was like a normal sex shop. That was very bizarre.
She did one in Art Basel, which was an operating theatre. Felt with a patient, and she operated every day. Wow. The National Felt Service.
Excellent. Did you have any more, Michael? Or was that the
no, that's all the ones I can see at the moment.
Anyone else got any other thoughts or questions?
What was the name of the Victorian spiritualist artist?
Georgiana Houghton.
Georgiana Houghton. That was extraordinary.
Yeah, ahead of her time, I think.
I know. I was thinking that would be. I mean, I don't know. She didn't sell well then, but if that was your story today, I think it'd be great, wouldn't it?
Well, thank you very much, Tabish. Thank you very much for doing the talk and all the support this week, or should we say many thanks?
Many thanks. Yeah.
It's been fascinating, and especially like to see some of the pieces we can go out and see.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the Gormley one especially. That was
fantastic, isn't it? But
really good.
So hopefully, if I've recorded this, we'll be able to put it up on the website so more people can see. And to those who booked tickets, thank you very much because you've contributed to raising money for London's air ambulance, which is
excellent. I would say there's another Gormley in the Welcome collection hanging off the ceiling. Yeah,
Ooh.
there's Gormleys everywhere. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care.